Hello, my name is Hugh Pickrell, and I am a relatively new member of this organization. I came here through the genealogy work of my sister Jan Pickrell. I arrived on a family membership, and I was asked to speak to you and share my knowledge about plumerias. My knowledge base for the sciences comes from my work to get my Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Southern California in biological sciences, but I must tell you, I didn't concentrate a heck of a lot on botany or horticulture in any way. I concentrated on human physiology and marine sciences. I actually got to plumerias quite by accident. But before I take off on plumerias, I need to throw in a word about environment and plant environments for plants that don't just grow native in your area. Plumerias don't grow native in my area. I live in Southern California on the coast, north of Los Angeles and south of Santa Barbara in Ventura. And we are essentially a coastal desert. We don't get much rain. We get, on the average, 9 to 12 inches of rain a year, and it tends to happen in one or two events. And plumerias, on the other hand, while they're identified with Hawaii, they are certainly not native to Hawaii. They were first identified in the Caribbean, more like the Central America area and the northern parts of South America, in what I think of more as rainforest areas where it's humid. Yes, it's warm, but at least there's ample moisture for the plants. So we have to augment moisture for the plants that we grow in our area, the plumerias that we grow in our area. They can thrive here, but unless we provide them with what we don't have naturally, they're not going to make it. I would add that you're going to have the same problems if you don't happen to live in the area that borders the Caribbean or in Hawaii, for example. You might be asking yourself, how did plumerias get to Hawaii? And they got to Hawaii like, and most of the plants in Hawaii are not native to Hawaii, like the pineapples, for example. They also come from the Caribbean. The Catholic monks and priests who accompanied the early explorers tended to gather plants that they thought were interesting as they traveled with the explorers, and they hit that Central American and northern part of South America region, and they collected samples. And as they went ahead and made their way across the Pacific and got to Hawaii, they left the plants there. And the rich volcanic soil and the moist climate just allowed pineapples and plumerias to go absolutely crazy. And most of what we know in the vibrant colors is a result of that Hawaiian laboratory of if you will, the environment was just so rich for the plants that they took off and did very well. They thrived. I stumbled onto cultivating plumerias entirely by accident, and that led to many mistakes as I tried to find success with them, and I'll share those with you too. I'm not going to tell you that you can't grow them in your area. I'm sure that you will be able to grow them almost anywhere in the continental United States, because I've sent them to relatives all over the continental United States. My sister lives in Washington, D.C. I have a brother who lives in Idaho. Janie Sue, well, she lives very close to where they were originally found in Houston. They were found in that Caribbean area, so she's definitely able to make them thrive in her area. She and Davina are doing quite well with theirs. But you're going to have to adjust your environment to fit the plant. Plants don't do too well at changing their dietary habits and their sunlight habits to meet your environment. I got into the whole business of growing plumerias in the early years of my relationship with my wife. We had begun work on this house and had torn this entire backyard apart to do all this brickwork, and we had had that avocado tree cut down to virtually a stump. We also had no plants in the flower boxes around here. And we went to the Ventura County Fair, and we were walking through the fair, and I came across a booth that was being run by the local Plumeria Society. So while we were standing there listening to the people at the Plumeria Society, I purchased one of their cuttings. Didn't look a heck of a lot different from this. You'll notice that the base is cut at an angle, and you'll notice that it has absolutely no leaves on it whatsoever. And this is how you prep a cutting that you intend to pot. And so I brought it home and set it on a table somewhere in the house, and we went about our business for the weekend. And after a while, when we took a moment's break, Debbie, my wife, looked at me and said, "What are you going to do with that thing?" And I looked over and thought, first thought was, well, take it outside and throw it in the trash. And then I said, well, I guess I'll go plant it. And she said, well, you know how? And I said, how hard could it be? And so I came out here, and there was this little spot here, and it was full of sand left over from the work that the masons had done, mixing their concrete to lay their bricks and prepare their mortar. And I literally just jammed the cutting into the ground and walked away and forgot about it. And I'll bet you it was about 2 months later, we came out here and that cutting had sprouted, and it had leaves. And I thought, whoa, that was a pleasant accident. And so we left it there. And the thing thrived, and I didn't know how to take care of it. So I went back and I looked through the materials that we had picked up at the fair, and I didn't find anything that came from the Plumerias Society, so I had to do some scouting online to figure out how to take care of them. And I learned a few things, and through the years, I learned a little more each year. And I got to the point where my plumeria hobby is kind of out of control. Usually I have anywhere from 50 to 100 plants that I am propagating at any one time. And honestly, what I do with them is I give them away. I pass them on to people who seem kind of fascinated by them, and I tell them how to take care of them. And occasionally I'll hear from people who want to know what I know about how to take care of them, and I guess that's kind of what I'm doing with you in this video, is trying to share with you ways that you might start down the road of this hobby. Let me share with you right off the bat some mistakes that I've made with this one. First of all, you'll see that it has a rather stout trunk. It's been here long enough and survived my mistakes enough that it's become rather robust. In fact, it's become so big at different times that it's completely blocked these two stairwells. And I've had to come out here and basically cut a pathway through so that we can go up and down the stairwells. And I was taking the cuttings and just throwing them in the trash. And one day I was out there doing that, and my next door neighbor came over, and as fate would have it, he's a retired commercial nurseryman. And he looked at my pile of plumeria cuttings and he said, are you really just throwing those away? And I said, well, yeah, what else would I do with them? And he said, well, you could grow new plants from them. And that's what started me down the road to re-examining this whole business and learning that, lo and behold, there's a reason that you cut them on an angle at the base. And the reason is simply that they're kind of a fleshy plant. And fleshy plants tend to be prone to rot. And if these babies rot, you might as well just throw them in the trash. You cut them on an angle so that when you do plant them in the soil, water will not pool around the stem base. Because if water pools down here at the stem base, that's one thing that will cause the base of the stem to rot. And that will kill the plant. And you'll never get anything growing from this. You strip all the leaves off so that the new plant is not going to struggle to maintain the leaves. It's going to try to sprout roots so that it can push nutrients up through these stems that will support the leaves. And with that, I'm going to take you over and give you a little potting lesson and show you what you need to make a plumeria do well, first of all, in a pot. And as we go over there, I'd like to show you a plumeria in a pot and assure you that they can do very well in pots. Would you point the camera over at that one in the pot? A little while back, this plumeria was looking pretty sickly, and frankly, I didn't care because I was just going to throw it out. I had 70, and my wife convinced me that she had seen the plant that this one originally came from, and it was red. I find that getting the colors to succeed, the colored blossoms, plants to succeed is kind of difficult. And I thought, wow, if I can make this one succeed, it'll be good. I moved this one up here probably in February, and if you can take the camera up here, you'll see that it's already sprouting a bloom, and it will break out into blossoms soon. But it seems to be very happy in this pot, and I intend to keep it in this pot for probably another couple of years before I put it into the ground. Keeping them in pots is also a good idea, a good way to find out where they'll do well. You can easily move a pot. You can put it in one location that you might be thinking of and see if the plant likes it, and keep your eye on it and see if it seems to be adapting okay to that area. And if it isn't adapting to that area okay, you can move it to another area and try it in another area and see how it does in the new spot. And it gives you a way to kind of set up your own little mobile testing facility. I'm going to say this probably again and again, you'll get tired of hearing it, but plumerias thrive on neglect. They're happier when you aren't doing too much to them. You don't want to overfeed them, you don't want to overwater them. They'll do better if you don't do anything to them than if you do too much to them. This is that plant, the first one that I ever planted that I referred to as my parent plant. This is the one I knew nothing about when I stuck it in the ground. I had someone tell me later, you'll notice that it's a white blossomed plant with lots of blossoms in each cluster. It's called a grape expectations, and no, I have no idea where they come up with the names. And I have no idea if that name is actually appropriate or correct. It hasn't been professionally identified. But I have discovered that the white ones, for some reason, are the hardiest, and they make the best foundation for whatever you might want to do with your plant. For example, I've started grafting on this one just as a fun hobby. This branch here, although it has no blooms to show for it right now, this is a graft, and this is a pink grafted branch on my white parent. Over there on the other side, there's a yellow grafted branch onto this white parent base. When you look down here at this trunk base, I rest assured that this plant is going to be getting plenty of nutrients up to these grafted branches that I'm putting on here, and it makes for kind of an entertaining plant. People are kind of surprised when they see multicolored blossoms on one plant. But I also want you to see from this perspective that I have these gangly, spindly branches. And the problem is that the avocado tree next to it is shading it. And these things love sunlight. So I had to do something to kind of bend it out so that it can get to the sunlight, help it get to the sunlight, and hopefully get it to the sunlight before its shading causes the branches to break. You can see here, I have a stump here, and I have a stump here, and it's because it was leaning so much to get to the sunlight that they broke off. So I dug around in the garage and gathered together some of my plant support materials that I'm sure you'd recognize, like garden tape. And I tried these things first. These kinds of garden tapes. And I put support stakes into the ground, and I wrapped the branches to the stakes. But if you'll recall, I said that these can be kind of really fluid-filled trunks. When you wrap this kind of a garden tape around it, and this thing is growing actively, it can strangle itself, and that's not going to help your plant survive. So I went back to the drawing board, and in the garage, and honestly, I have no idea what I bought it for, I found this plastic mesh material. And I found that when I cut it in strips and use it as kind of a cradle, along with some zip ties and wire, it provides the stems with support. Yes, you could use old nylons or anything like that that spread the support out and provides kind of a support that's generalized as opposed to a concentrated band of support, and leaves room for the plant to grow. But I would recommend it. You'll find that these things are really easy to shape. You can move them very simply. And that's why I didn't do anything fancy when it came to twisting down the wires that I'm using to support it, because I can shorten them up. In a week or two, there's going to be enough slack in these wires that I'll pull them, I'll loosen them up, pull them tight, and twist them back down again. So there's no sense in doing any kind of a fancy tight wrap if I'm just going to be readjusting it all the time. But the important point here is to make sure that the support that you're providing for the plant is a generalized support on the stem and not a concentrated tight wrap. When I was doing some pruning over the last month or so, I saved these pieces that I thought would make good plantings. And it reminded me that telling you about them might help you understand about those monks and priests and why they were able to get plant samples to the Hawaiian Islands. When you read up on preparing canes for planting, they tell you to cut the stems at an angle, strip off all of the leaves, and let them set without water for at least 2 weeks. And that's what these have done. Of course, now I have to plant them. And to plant them, this is what I do. I take a planter, and honestly, I tend to use stuff that's left over from other plants that we've planted around the yard, or plants that I managed to mooch from neighbors who were doing plantings in their yards. I cover the bottom, the hole in the bottom, to promote drainage, I cover the bottom with large rocks. I then take a bucket and I put in about a mix of about 70% cactus mix that promotes good drainage. And then I add to that about, none of these measurements are critical, so don't go weighing out the components, trust me. I take about 30%, or at least a good dollop, of sand or decomposed granite, works just as good, to just loosen up the soil a bit more. And frequently, I will add a good dose of perlite and mix it together, just to give a mix that has good drainage for the new plant. And I pour this on top of the rocks. Now I can see right off the bat that I didn't mix up enough soil, so I'm just going to throw in a bit more. And I'm going to call that good enough for a while. Now, I take my cutting and I stick it in about 4 to 6 inches, and that's going to be its home for about 2 years. And I'm going to set this up here in what I've come to call the nursery. This is what's left of the plants that I haven't given away so far. So far in the last maybe 3 weeks, I've given away 4, maybe 5 dozen newly rooted Plumerias. But I'm going to add these to this group, and hopefully in a year or so they'll start looking like these. Okay, now that we've planted our cutting, we're going to have to take care of watering and feeding it during this period where it's trying to sprout roots. So we're going to call this nursery period a period of time that lasts about 4 months. And you're going to want to feed it about once every 3 to 4 weeks. And you're not going to get crazy with watering it during this period. You may sprinkle it a little bit, but you're not going to get nuts about soaking it. You're going to be primarily depending on what you give it when you feed it. I tend to use water-soluble fertilizers, and the reason for that has to do with just making sure that my plants are getting their water with their food. Now, when they're in this cutting stage, What I tend to give them is a dose of some kind of a quick start, and trust me, I'm not selling any brand, but I give them some kind of a quick start because the quick start fertilizers tend to be really mild and they contain vitamin B1. You'll want to check the labels to make sure that that's what you're getting. This happens to be a 4-12-4, meaning that it's 4 parts nitrogen, 12 parts phosphorus, and 4 parts potassium. And that's not a very strong fertilizer. I augment that with a dose of Super Thrive. Now, as I said, I'm not getting any kind of a kickback or royalty from Super Thrive. Remember the commercial grower that I told you about, who's my next door neighbor? He and his father before him were commercial growers, and Larry told me that they met the man who put this stuff on the market, and they used to buy this stuff in his nurseries in 55-gallon drums. And you don't use much of it. It's available on Amazon. I use, according to the instructions, 1/4 of a teaspoon of Super Thrive for every gallon of water or liquid fertilizer. So what I'll do is I'll take a gallon of water, I'll add a cap full of this liquid starter fertilizer. It's not even a cap full, it's more like about half a cap of this, and it's marked inside. And then I'll put in 1/4 of a teaspoon of Super Thrive. Super Thrive is a vitamin booster, and it's amazing. Most plants don't get any vitamins during their lifetime. This stuff is made from kelp, our local marine algae, and it definitely works. So about once every 3 to 4 weeks, I'll give them a good dose. And when I say a good dose, I'm talking about 2 cups of that fertilizer mix, and they're water soluble, just poured around the base of the plant in the pot. And that's what they'll get for about the first 4 months. And then I'll start them on whatever cycle the regular plants are on. And I water all of my established plants on that once a month basis. Now, let me explain that cycle, that fertilizing cycle. In this environment that we have here, from January until through March, January through March, our plants are in a general growing period. They're coming out of a period of dormancy that they're in for the winter months, and they need to kick in their food production to the plant and establish stems and trunks and pump up their leaves and just get generally healthy after this period of hibernation that they've been in for the winter months. And during that period, I give them a general fertilizer, which is water soluble, and I mix it with Super Thrive. And this particular water soluble fertilizer just happens to be a 24-8-16. And that mix, as I'm sure you folks know better than I do, the nitrogen, the first number, tends to establish good leaves and good greenery. The phosphorus is the key to the production of flowers, seeds, fruits, and roots. And the potassium, the last number, builds up plant vigor and resistance to pests. And that's why those numbers are important. And that period of building up the robust nature of the entire plant, as I said, tends to go January through March. Now, when we hit the end of March, we're entering into the blooming phase for the plants. And that'll run March, the beginning of April, through about the end of September. We're in it right now. You've seen the plumerias around here and how they're doing. And for that, I tend to give them a food that boosts the blooms, and they go by a million different names. They call them bloom busters, and they tend to have a larger middle number, a larger phosphorus number that promotes the production of blooms. And the one that I tend to use during those months is a 15-30-15. And 30 is definitely a strong number, but it helps them build blooms that last. And yes, I throw in 1/4 teaspoon of Super Thrive per gallon. And then at about the end of that blooming period, and that blooming period, as I said, goes through the end of September. When we start getting into October through the end of December, the plumerias go into a period of dormancy. And in that dormant period, they lose their leaves, they look scraggly. People who don't know about them will throw them out. During that period, I give them a 0-10-10 fertilizer. They're losing their leaves. They don't need anything to try to boost leaf production. But they need something that's going to keep their roots going, and they need something that's going to help their general plant vigor. So a 0-10-10 will do that just fine. So there's that cycle that I tend to follow for the plant fertilizers. When we were having some tree trimming done, we ended up with a bunch of damage being done to plumerias that were in pots. And my wife said, look, why don't you just take them up and plant them in the ground? And we had this area that we were doing absolutely nothing with. And some of these plants have been broken down and were doing really poorly after they got smashed by a few tree limbs. So we brought them up here and put them in the ground, and they took off like gangbusters. And they've done quite well up here. In fact, I'd be so bold as to say that they've thrived. This is what they've managed to do in about a year since they were broken. This is to simply point out that they will also do quite well in planters. Thank you for the honor of allowing me to address you and share what I know about plumerias. If you have any questions that I might be able to answer, you can email me at hughsgarden@gmail.com. and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can.